Okay, so when we last left off, this was where we were at. We're going to start off by importing some boulders, which I downloaded from stylized.com. These are for game engines, so there's multiple levels of detail, models for each one. I'll just get the highest detail level. Right, so first off, I'll just select all of them, add a new material, and then with Control L, I'll just link them. Right, and then these come with their own texture maps as well, so just pull those in. I'll just grab the base color, dirt mask, gradient mask, normal, roughness. Okay, it only brings in those three, so I'll just duplicate this twice. And over here, I'll bring in the gradient and the dirt mask. It's always nice to use these extra masks just to add a bit of detail to your shader. So there's the color, roughness, and the normal map. So we'll delete the principled, bring in our node group, and just connect up the normal, the roughness, and the color. Okay, and there's the base of our shader. Since these are going to be placed on the ground and we've got this gradient, it might be nice to blend in a bit of a green color towards the bottom so that the fall off is quite nice. We'll add a mix color over here, plug that into the factor, and then mix in a green color, something like that. You can add in a math multiply node to increase the contrast. And then finally we've got this dirt mask, so we can duplicate our mix node and use that dirt mask to blend in a bit of brown. You can use another multiplier over here, or you can use a color ramp as well. And I might change this to multiply. Yeah, not much of a difference, but that's up to you, which blending mode you want to use. And then for this one, let's say I do want the rim light. Mess around with our light intensity here, to complement the scene at the end. Okay, so there are some boulders. These boulders might not look the nicest just like this, but if we add in more area lights, light these up from specific angles, let's give this a orange color. Our scene is quite bright and sunny, and you can see using this we can get some nice soft gradients, further lending itself to the 2D feel. But we'll experiment with that more once the scene is done and dial everything in so that the piece becomes one cohesive piece. Let's create these steps. I'll add in a mesh plane and we'll grab a texture that I also found on stylized.com, these ground tiles. I'll just add a little bit of modeling to this just to give it a bit of depth. We'll grab all of these corners, Ctrl-Shift-B to bevel them like so. Grab those ones, inset them individually, and Alt-S scale along normals. Then I'll grab these ones. Let's also grab these ones. And we can inset those too, scale them up as well. You can just scale along the Z-axis if you feel needs a bit more height. I think we're going to go for kind of steps out of these, so some height would be nice. Scale it up, put it back on the origin, and let's add in some arrays. And let's add a duplicate and put this on the other axis. Okay, there we go. So for this, let's also update this material. So just call the styles. I'll disconnect this and bring this up. So now we can grab we've got ambient occlusion, we've got height, normal. Those will be more than enough. So I'll delete that, bring in our node group. And we've got color, normal, and in this case we can actually use our height map as a roughness map. So I'll just play around with the contrast, probably make it quite rough all around. There we go. So for this I'll probably remove the rim light and lower the lighting intensity. We still want to keep some detail in that. And then in my example, I think I only kept 2 of these for the foreground. Duplicate this. I'll delete that one. I think I'll just delete all of those. Grab that bottom loop and set the origin over there. So now when I add in a new array, I'll put it over here and give it a height offset as well. And we have some stairs. Let's say for these I'll scale it up a bit on the Z-axis. so that they're a bit more substantial. Okay, and then for the floor, I've already subdivided this floor, so let's grab this row, extend that to there, and with proportional editing, maybe on this, we can just shape the surrounding ground, and then maybe do a bit of sculpting. I like to overlap these corners a little bit just so that it's not, completely perfect. Can feel like there's a bit of dirt or grass buildup in those crevices. And let's sculpt our foreground as well, just a little bit, so it's not completely flat. Here I'll just move my camera a little bit. I'm just going to set the scene up a little bit as well. For this scene, I'm not going to try to recreate my example scene one-to-one. I actually spent quite a few hours, constantly changing the layout, just trying to get a nice composition, nice placement of the rocks and everything. So we'll just do something pretty simple for this one. Let's do a floating Suzanne head, why not? Let's go for something like that. So let's just quickly re-unwrap this, and also just scale this so that the size of the texture makes a bit more sense. Something like that should work. Okay, so this method for the ground, I actually found this in a tutorial once. If I find the link for that, I'll put it on the screen here. There are a few different stages that go into this. So let's first off begin with our model. So for the grass blades, I'm going to import another mesh plane, and I'll be using these strokes. I'll provide the stroke texture in the comments below, so you can grab that. And I'll just go through separating all of these. Separate by loose parts and give them all their own origins. Let's rotate like this. And okay, I'll just be working on these over here. So first off, I want all of these strokes to have a similar origin point, which would be at the base of the stroke, and I'm going to align them in the direction that I want. So for example, for this one, I see it's got a thicker, more solid stroke at the bottom, so that'll be the base of the grass blade. And as it goes to the top, it feathers out more, so that'll be the tip of the grass blade. Over here in the tool menu, enable origins, and then it'll only move the origin. So I'll place them over here. Just keep an eye on the rotation. It's 90 and minus 90. This doesn't matter too much. You can always adjust this in the geometry node setup to work with whatever models you have, but if you want, you can just apply those rotations. And then a bit of modeling. So for all of these, I'll just subdivide it once. Up here in the options menu, there's a correct face attributes, so that when you move these verts around, the UVs also move around. So right now I'm just trying to limit the amount of alpha that's needed for each of these grass blades. It's not too big a deal, but on much larger scenes this can bog down Blender quite a bit. Okay, then I'll disable this, and for all of these I want them to be thinner on the top. So with proportional editing I can get a decent grass blade shape out of it. And since I've only got one tall one, I'll just change this one to be a tall one as well. Actually, let's go for this one. We'll work on this material in a moment. Let me just use it like this for now. I'll just invert the alpha. Okay, and then on our ground object, we'll switch over to geometry nodes and create a new system. Okay, so what we want to do here is distribute points on faces. If you view that, See, there's quite a few points. If you hover over that output, you can see exactly how many grass blades you have. Right now they're still quite sparse, so we would like to increase this number, but if we enable timings here, we'll see how long each node takes to calculate, and as you increase this, it's going to take that much time every frame to calculate. So for now it's okay. We'll look at ways to optimize this later, where it takes into account the position of your camera. We can save a bit of performance by not needing to render all of these points on the side that aren't in the view of the camera. First off, we've distributed points, but we don't want to lose our ground, so I'll just join these up so that we keep our ground. So from here, we want to instance on those points, and we want to use our grass collection. So I'll separate and reset the children as well as pick instance and plug that in. Okay, nice. They're all facing one direction. And what I'd actually like is for these to always be facing the camera direction, because right now the camera gets over here, they'll just appear as flat planes. So what we can do is bring our camera in with an object info node. But instead of doing this, there's actually a node for active camera, so that if you have multiple cameras, whichever one's the active one in the scene, it's going to take that into account. Switch this to relative, and then I'll bring in a position node. So this will contain the position of each point of each instance. We'll subtract that from the location of the camera, so that for each grass blade we have a vector pointing towards the camera, and then we're going to align that rotation to that vector. So we'll plug that in. See that it's not using the correct axis, so change that. Looks like Y works. Here we can mess around with the scale as well, so I'll bring in a random value, plug it in here. Let's say we'll go from 0.1 to 0.6 of the maximum scale. Okay, so let's increase our density just to get a feel of what this looks like. You'll see with that high density, when you play, you lose a lot of performance over here. So we'll definitely look at optimizing that. But first, for now, let's just add in a rotate instances, because I want to give it a bit more random variation. So we'll change this to vector, turn that down to 0 and plug it in. And then we'll just see which axis it will be, the Y axis. If you remember, that's the one that we aligned them to, so Y will be rotating like this. So we'll give a little bit over there, a little bit over here. Let's do the same over here. Having rotation on the Z wouldn't make much sense because they end up being flat if they're facing the camera. Okay, and over here I'll bring out the shader for those grass blades, and I'll add in the grass strokes material here, just so that I can access it easily. We've got our grass, our mask for the grass. Actually don't want that in the base color. That's only going to be used for the alpha. Okay, so for these grass blades, I want to capture a few attributes from the ground plane to bring over into the system. One of those attributes will be the base color. So whatever color it samples from this base texture, that's what I want to pass that through to the actual grass blade. So we'll add in a store named attribute. I'm just going to lower this density so that it's a bit more responsive. So our first attribute is going to be, we'll call it sample color. Change this to a color, and this is on the instance domain. So if we bring in our group input, which has our input geometry, I want to sample the nearest surface. I'm going to be sampling a color, and this color is going to come from an image texture. That image texture will be our grass color. This needs a UV map input. We'll see we've got it over there, so plug that in, plug that into the color, plug that into that color. So now when we type in sample color over here and preview this, change this to instancer, and now all of our grass blades have color. So let's actually start just with that color. I'll bring in our node group, and here, because I'm going to make a few changes to the node group, I'm actually going to ungroup this so that I have the nodes from inside there. For this one, I'm not going to need a principled, so I'll just go with a diffuse, and let's plug our sample color into that and preview the output. So right now we'll see that we lost our brush texture. That's fine, because we just need to add in a transparent PSDF, put that into a mix shader, and plug this into the bottom slot, preview that, and then we can grab our mask image texture, plug it in there, and we've got our brush strokes back. Okay, so let's go through and adjust our shader to work for this grass. So we're going to be using that lighten step at first. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't want our base color to go over there. We want the base color to go over here into our first lighten stage. So now we'll keep it backlit, and you'll see that these adjustments, they kind of adjust, but they don't do all too much. And that's because the normals of these grass blades aren't very interesting. They're all kind of facing a similar direction that's in this negative y direction. So what we actually need to do is sample the normal from the plane below and bring that into our diffuse BSDF normal input. So I'll add in another store named attribute. This one we'll call sample normal. Still on the instance domain. This time it's a vector, and we can get this normal from our distribute points on faces. Plug that in over there. We'll duplicate this, bring that name in, and plug that in. The big trick with this whole method, and what that guy outlines in that tutorial, is that he duplicates his floor. We'll duplicate that and remove the GeoNodes object. Let's just hide the original for now. And over here, I'll add in a displaced node. We've got quite a lot of geometry, so that's good. Let's add in a new texture. Okay, and then over here, you can either import in a height map or just do like a clouds displacement, just so that there's, some detail over there. And then I'll hide that one again, re-enable our other one. Let's just hide that for now, and I'll add in a data transfer modifier. So for the source object, I'll select the other one. We're going to be looking at face corner data and custom normals. So if you see over there, as we toggle this, the normals from that displacement are being transferred over while this plane can stay flat. Or it can keep to the sculpted shape that we had, but you can see now there's a bit more interesting lighting happening over there. So when we turn this back on, it should now be transferring those normals over to this. Okay, you can then adjust the strength of the displacement on the displaced model if you want to mess around with that. But once you're happy, you can go back to this model and apply this modifier. Okay, so now we are seeing these ugly striped artifacts on the grass blades, and that's because they're trying to basically cast shadows from the sun. So as you see the sun hitting from behind, some of these grass blades are trying to calculate the shadows. That's what gives those striped lines. So what we actually need to do is disable shadow casting for all of our grass strokes. So with all of the strokes selected, go to Object, Visibility, and then Ray Visibility Shadow. If you hold in Alt and click, it will disable this for all of them. So now we see that this gives us a nice flat color, and we're getting a few darker blades that's coming from the normal map of our displaced floor. So right now we're seeing too much variation from the normals that are transferred from this other mesh. So just give myself a nicer camera angle over here, and let's delete those custom normals, and let's add in the data transfer again. So we'll select that model, face corner data, custom normals, and then on the displaced mesh, we'll go to the texture and just increase this. So if you want another preview of this, you can preview the actual sampled normal. So when the scale is quite high, you see there's quite a lot of variation, and we don't want that. We want it to be quite gradual across the whole thing. So even something like this would be cool. Let's look at our first lighten stage. Okay, so that looks a bit more natural. I think for this, we can generate and then apply. And then I'll just increase the amount here, so that we can see that a bit better. Okay, so again, let's go through this. We've got our lighten stage. We can mess around with these values to dial that in. We can see these darker patches from the transferred normals and then these lighter patches. Another way to shape this lighting is to add blockers. So just add in a plane, scale it up, and put this over here and allow those shadows to fall. Okay, so that's the first lighten stage. Let's move on to our shadow stage. If you remember, we have that set to mixed from before. Here we can experiment with different blending modes, so perhaps darken, perhaps multiply, and then also playing around with these color ramps. You can add another map range if you want over here, further dial that in. But I think mix works okay for now. Let's see that it falls down to that world shadow color and kind of blends with the ground as well. Okay, then from the darken stage, we go to the rim light screen stage. And for the grass, I actually don't use this. So I'll actually just delete all of this stuff. Instead, what I want to add is a multiply, and we're going to use this to paint in some shadows. So, okay, so this will be to darken, and we can set this color. Let's probably go with a similar blue that we have in our wall shader. I'll actually just copy that color and place it over there. We want to control this factor. So one way that we can do that is to, on our mesh, let's just disable the grass for now. We'll add in a color attribute, and let's call this dark. Change this to face corner. I prefer face corner over vertex because vertex only lets you paint on individual vertices, whereas face corners let you paint in each corner of any given face. So we'll set that to dark, to black. And then in vertex paint mode, let's just go to solid view. We can paint in a bit of darkness. So let's say we wanted this area to be darker. Then once again, we'll sample another one. Let's call this sample dark. And once again, I'll Control Shift D so it duplicates while keeping the connections. Delete that connection and add in a named attribute, which we've got over here as dark. Change that to a color, plug that in there, and now we are sampling that over there. So let's duplicate our attribute. Let's look at sample dark and preview that. I'll just enable this again, and over here we can see the area that we painted becomes white, and that passes through to the shader. So then we can use this possibly through a color ramp into that factor. So now regardless of lighting, you can paint in shadows wherever you like. And let's say behind these barrels, I want those grass blades to be a bit darker. So I can paint that in. Just go with a soft strength so that it doesn't get too dark all at once. There you go. So this will be one way that you can really art direct your scene and, you know, make it look exactly as you want. You can further control this with this color ramp if you need to. And that's pretty much it for our grass shader. Okay, so that is our basic grass shader. We'll see that it reacts to light as well, and we can change this to a similar color as our sun lamp, and then use this to also art direct different pockets of light. Okay, so another thing we can add to this grass is a bit of noise variation on the alpha for each stroke. So to do that, I'll just change this to ease. We'll add in a math multiply, and we'll put a color ramp on this as well and increase that contrast. We can add in some mapping nodes to the noise, and I think I'll stretch it along the x-axis, along the z-axis. And let's pull it back a bit more. And that just adds a little bit of variation to each grass stroke. That way it can feel like there's more than just 5. And right now they're all using the exact same noise texture. So if we change this to 4D, we get a W slider, which basically changes the seed of the noise texture, but it's still changing it the same way for every grass texture. So let's capture one more attribute over here. We'll call it random, rand for random, change it to float, and I'll bring in a random value between 0 and 1. That should be fine. Then with that attribute, random set to instancer, we can plug that into the W. Let's multiply that also by some big number. And now each grass blade will have its own sampling of the noise texture to just break it up a bit further. Since we have this random, we can also go ahead and add in a bit of hue variation. So let's say before our multiply, add in a hue saturation value, plug that into the color, and then from our random, put that through a map range, change it to float. Our random value goes from 0 to 1, and we see that our hue is neutral at 0.5. So we'll also go, so let's change it to both 2.5. That does nothing, and then we'll lower the 2 min a little bit and increase the 2 max a little bit. That just gives us a little bit of variation. So before and after. Cool, so let's start optimizing our grass scattering setup. So first off, the easiest thing that we can do is to just say where the grass should grow. So let's add a grass vertex group, and we'll weight paint. Let's say I want grass nearly everywhere, except for over here where these steps are. It is nice to have a few grass blades peeking out between the stones, but not everywhere. I mean, it doesn't make sense looking like that. So I'll just drag off from here into the density factor. And we'll change this to use our grass group. And now we can refine where these grass blades show up. Okay, then we can also use that same density factor to affect the scale of our grass blades. So from our random value, let's add a multiply node, and let's also multiply it by that. So that means that as they get closer to the edge of the boundary of the grass blades will become smaller. And you can refine that further in the weight painting. So if I take a blur these out, we can control that gradual change from tall grass to short grass. So I'm just going to paint in some more grass here on the sides so that we can get into a bit of camera culling. So the camera culling is basically going to calculate where to spawn grass and where not to spawn grass. If you look at this is what the camera views. So we only want to spawn grass within that frustum just so that we can save on performance, not having to spawn them everywhere. I found this method from another tutorial. I'll put a link up on screen so you can see that. And basically we want to be deleting points that fall outside of that frustum. So I'll just add a delete geometry, and I'll add a node group for that. Let's call this camera cull. And then inside here, I actually don't want the selection input. Okay, so the math's going to come here. So let's bring in an object info node. We're going to need the active camera plugged into this. Set that to relative. Okay, so we'll subtract the position from the location. We'll normalize that vector, and then we'll vector rotate that vector by the rotation. So set this to Euler and plug the rotation into rotation. And then from here, we'll separate x, y, z. And I'm not sure who came up with these equations, but there are equations that work. So thanks to whoever did that. This will be our focal length. And we'll go to the camera, right-click, copy driver, and we'll paste the driver over there. So the camera length is going to be divided by the z component. Then our x is going to be multiplied by that to give us x prime. Our y is also multiplied by that to give us y prime. We want the absolute value of both of these. So that's our x and y prime. And then we're going to need two more value nodes. So this one will be the sensor width and the sensor height. This will also get from our camera. So under camera, we change this to horizontal. So we'll add two add nodes over here. And then from our group input, I'll add these over here. So we'll call this buffer X and buffer Y. These will control how close to the camera frustum our points are deleted. And then from here, we're going to be comparing these, and they're going to be less than or equal to our buffers. Okay, next we'll add a boolean and, because both of them need to be true at the same time, and then add in a not to invert that selection and delete all of those. So with that, we see that as we move our camera around, we're now deleting all points outside of that camera frustum. Back here in the node group, we'll see that the X buffer basically controls that, and the Y buffer controls that side. So if you ever get into a situation where you're not seeing them anymore like that, you can just increase that buffer to bring them back. Cool, so that's a bit of optimizing for you. Next, let's add in a bit of wind noise. So now you'll see that we can, without our camera culling, if we increase this density, you'll see our frame rate drops, but if we enable the camera culling, we get a bit of it back. So that's quite nice. Bring this up quite high and then work on the weight painting a little bit. So this is the amount that I'd like, or about 70, but it's not playing in real time anymore for me. If I lower this down to 30, I see that it plays mostly in real time. There's just less here, so let's just add in a is viewport node and plug this into a switch so that we can just dynamically switch between these. So when it is viewport, I want it 30, and when it's not, I want it 70. So this just means while I'm working like this, it'll look like this, but when I do a render, it's going to take in that bigger number into account. Okay, I'm also just going to change my output resolution to be 2538 so that I have a nice wide aspect ratio. Just looks a bit more cinematic. So let's add in that wind system. So we'll add in another rotate instances node, and I'm going to implement this quite simply. So I'll add in a vector node, which will let me specify a specific rotation. So let's say at no wind, it's going to look like this, and at full wind, it's going to look like this. So that'll be our rotation. We'll put in a vector math scale, and then we can add in a noise texture. I'll add in a scene time and divide the seconds, say by 20, change this to 40, plug that into the W, and plug that into the scale. And as you play that, you'll get a bit of movement in your grass. You can mess around with these settings to change the look. This value will control the speed. You can bring up the roughness for individual leaves to move independently and bring it down for them to move more as clumps. I think a smaller value for this noise works better, since then you can really feel the overall wind currents. So everything moves together. Let's bring this down even further. And you'll see like this, they're nicely moving in clumps. But if you increase that roughness, you'll get a bit more individual chaotic movement. That's completely up to you. Let's just lower this even more so that I get a bit more viewport performance, and we can just do frame dropping so that we see everything at its real speed. Okay, nice. So now let's go in again and do a bit more vertex painting to bring in a bit of shadow in the background. let's do a little bit of compositing. So I'll enable my mist pass. Let's change this to mist. We can then mess around with these values to control our fall off. Okay, then I'll open up a compositor, enable use nodes, and remember we set our compositor to always. So from here, we'll add a color ramp to our mist, and we'll add a mix node to the image. We'll change this to be screen, and we'll use a nice light blue color and use our color ramp into that. You bring the white color down to control how much of that's visible, and then you can just carry on dialing this in to your liking. For completeness, I'll bring in that door as well. So okay, I actually can't remember where I put that original model, so I've just copied it over from my example scene. That means that these materials are already set up, but you can see they are. It functions exactly the same. There's a metallic roughness output. Instead of using the base color, I separated the channels of this, so that'll give the metallic map, the roughness map, and then I believe this is AO or displacement. I just took the roughness map, put that through a color ramp, and plug that into the base color. So with that over there, I've also got the door material, which is basically the same thing. I just separated it into its own material so that I can isolate it in the cryptomats. So enable cryptomat material. We'll add in a cryptomat node. Looking at our scene, and let's go pick. We are going to select the door, and that gives us this mask. So then from here, I can duplicate our color, our mix node. We'll set it to color, use that matte as the factor, and we can change the color of our door to a nice red. And then we just need to add some more lights. Again, I'll give this a similar color to our sun lamp, maybe a bit more saturated, maybe a bit more yellow. That's nice. So you'll see without the compositing, and with compositing can do quite a lot to bring your scene to life. I'll also just add a few more lights to the background, to our rocks. And this is where you're going to go in and adjust all of these materials and the scene as a whole so that everything works together cohesively. Change that to be a rectangle so that I can make it longer. So you'll see I'm going to selectively add in more detail into the shadows where I feel it needs it. So over here, this rock, these rocks over here, they form a kind of like central structure, and then with these in the background here, can look like it goes off further into the distance. So we can mess around with this with our mist pass, maybe increasing the amount of mist in the background. You can change this maybe to linear, see what works for you. Another thing that you can do, which I didn't do in that scene, but you definitely can, is give these lights a negative value and actually bring in shadow. Don't go too crazy with this because it does end up in some false colors. You can see this green over here, so use that sparingly. But if you do need to control the amount of light reaching a specific area, that's one way you can do it. One other thing that I added to the scene, which was quite nice, is those rolling shadows as if there's cloud cover above. So we call those GOBOs. It's basically a mesh with a bunch of shapes cut out of it. So let's add in a mesh plane, scale it up, bring it above, apply the scale, and let's just place it so that it's covering the scene. I'll add in quite a few subdivisions, so something like 50, and let's add in a new geonodes. So this will be our gobos. Let me just rename this to grass. Okay, and this will be quite a simple little setup. We'll change it to delete faces, and we want to delete from a noise texture. Bring in a greater than node, so wherever this noise texture is greater than our threshold, it'll delete those faces, and we want the scale to be quite small as well. And you can already see that gives us a nice look. We can scale this up, play around with the scale a bit, and then what I like to do to just smooth out those edges is add in a position, blur attribute, plug that into position, and then increase the iterations just so that that's smoother. And we have all of our noise settings over here, so if you want to change the scale, the detail, any of those things, you can change just to 4D so that you can choose different seeds. And then what I like to do is to just animate this moving across the scene. So we'll just add a keyframe there, add a keyframe at the end, make sure that your plane is large enough to cover the scene in both positions. Select both of these, press T and change it to linear, and there you go. We'll just lower the scale a bit more so that it's not so intense, and mess around with the coverage. There you go. Just keep in mind that while you're playing it, it might not look nice, but when you pause, those shadows will resolve and you'll get a much nicer look out of it. Okay, and then one last thing that we can do is, if you look at these grass strokes, I think I'll grab this one. Let's take it out of this collection, and we'll make this a Godray. So let's look at it here. I'll just straighten these out again, increase the scale quite a bit, make it kind of wide, and let's move it to the background over here. And let's change this material a bit. Let's just duplicate that and call this Godray. So for this one, we're going to be mixing a transparent and an emission this time with no color. And we're basically going to be playing around with this mask. So if we put a color ramp here, change that to ease, and the white, which is going to be mixing where the emission is, you can just bring that down. This I actually like to change to blended so that it doesn't pick up in any of the crypto mats, and just gives a smoother look with these non-black and white values going into the factor. So if you remember, we have our mask multiplied by the noise texture to just give it a bit of variation. I'll just delete this and play around with our noise texture, something like that. And then let's add in a gradient texture, preview that, and rotate it on the y-axis. So we get that. Plug that into a color ramp. Let's flip that around, change to ease, and then add in another multiply it by that gradient so that we get our stroke that fades off to black towards the end. That into the color ramp and into the mix, and it looks like that. So now we can mess around with this to control the fall off. You can mess around with this color ramp to control those streaks. Maybe a bit of the noise scale as well. And then this final one to increase the intensity of it. And you can just duplicate a few other strokes to make a few variations and stack them together if you want. And give it a bit of a yellow color to just match the rest of the scene. And there you go. That's how I put together the scene, or that other scene that I made. There's a few other things that I added in that, like a geometry node system to scatter those points based on where I drew a curve, and then instance some more smaller brush strokes on that to make it look kind of like moss or grass is growing on those brush strokes. I'll make a few more tutorials going over those different techniques, but I think with this as a basis, you should be able to make whatever you want to make. There are quite a few different places that you can affect the colors, so you definitely want to go through and make all of those adjustments yourself. Remember, this is an artistic process, so you want to balance the colors as best you can and choose colors that complement each other well. So that's about it. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a thumbs up, and I'll definitely be making more in the future, so stay tuned for those.